The Turkish president has just declared a state of emergency in Turkey, which will radically enhance his powers for the next 3 months. The cabinet and the president will now be able to bypass parliament when it comes to drafting new laws. And the international arena is expressing concern that the measure will undermine Turkey's democracy, law, and freedoms. But how will this week's events influence the Middle East as a whole? ILTV's Steve Leibowitz sat down with top Middle East analyst Dr. Jonathan Spire to find out.
In terms of the region in general, I don't think things will change that much because, Erdogan was already pursuing a particular regional policy, which had changed quite significantly, I think, in recent months after the departure of Prime Minister Ahmet Davutoglu, a sense in which Erdogan was now seeking to reconcile with a number of powers with which he had become very much estranged. First of all, Russia, also Israel now. And there's a sense in which, from a foreign policy point of view, things will carry on pretty much the same. If Erdogan had lost power and the military had come to power, that would have been then probably a very great change in terms of Turkish regional policy. But as of now, Erdogan's firmly in the driving seat, so things will carry on pretty much as they were before, I think.
Now they, of course, have a major role in Syria, which is their next door neighbor. Millions of refugees have entered Turkey. It's the Air Force base, one of their bases, is being used by the Allies to attack. How do you think that will play out?
Well, my sense is that the rebellion in northern Syria, the Turkish-supported rebellion in northern Syria, is going through some very hard days. The Assad regime, with its Iranian and Hezbollah and Russian assistance, have just sealed off the last entry point into rebel-controlled eastern Aleppo, a place called the Castello Road. That had been a sort of 5-kilometer wide outlet for the rebels to bring in goods and ammunition and people into rebel-controlled eastern Aleppo. The regime has now closed it, which means that there is now a very real possibility of a long siege of eastern Aleppo in which there is around 300,000 people, most of them civilians, and a prospect for a real humanitarian problems. The Turks need to be concerned about this as well, of course, because what it could also lead to would be a departure of civilians in the direction of the Turkish border once again, in an attempt by refugees to enter Turkey. And Turkey's pretty much being clear it doesn't want any more Syrian refugees coming in. So, the rebellion that Turkey has supported from the outset is going through some hard days. I don't think it's finished yet. Turkey is supporting some very powerful military forces that are still there on the ground in northwestern Syria, but it's going through hard days indeed. And certainly the notion that the Turks had at the beginning of all this back in 2011, that they'll support these paramilitaries on the ground and they'll rapidly take down the Assad regime is pretty much off the agenda right now. The rebels are fighting a kind of war of survival, I would say.
You're known as an expert relating to the Kurds, and certainly there's no love lost between the Kurds and Erdogan. Were they actively, to your knowledge, supporting the notion of a coup against Erdogan?
I don't think so, because with the Kurds, it's not quite clear to any of us who exactly was responsible for this coup. The Turkish government is blaming the Gulen movement. But the Gulen movement, we know, is actually not that strong in the military. It's much stronger in the police and security services, so it's unlikely it was the Gulen movement. From a Kurdish point of view, the Kurds have no good memories of Turkish nationalist generals, which are probably the most likely ones, to have put forward this coup attempt. Kemalist nationalist generals. In many ways, when Erdogan first came to power, the Kurds were quite hopeful that an Islamic leader would maybe be more lenient with them than a strongly Turkish nationalist leader like we've seen in the past. Well, it turned out that he wasn't any more lenient. But, the Kurds wouldn't have any reason at all to see potential allies in nationalist Turkish generals coming to power via military coup. And if that was the most likely scenario of what took place on Friday, I don't think the Kurds would in any way be welcoming that or looking forward to that. It would bring, I think, new problems for them in a certain sense.
Do you think that, just as an observer of the situation, that the military leaders that were involved in this coup were kind of looking at the Egyptian model, hoping to have Morsi, like Morsi was deposed by the military and replaced by al-Sisi, that they would be able to replace Erdogan with a military government in that way?
Well, I think so. I mean, Turkey, of course, has seen military coups in the past, which in many ways do also resemble the coup that took place in Egypt on July 3rd, 2013. Obviously in 1960, I think 1971, 1980, again in 1997. There have been these coups in Turkey that follow a certain familiar pattern. So yeah, I'm sure that these generals, whoever they were, we're seeing a bunch of people arrested. We'll perhaps find out eventually who really was behind this. We're thinking in those terms. However, what's interesting to note is that if they were thinking in those terms, looking at the levels of disorganization, the relatively small numbers of soldiers apparently involved, the basic mistakes made by the coup plotters. Indeed, we learned that at one time 2 F-16 fighter jets under the control of rebel airmen had Erdogan's plane in its sight in its way to Istanbul and did not open fire. So there's a whole bunch of question marks about this. If they were thinking about the Sisi coup or earlier Turkish military coups, they really should have done a bit more studying of what those coups looked like, because it appears on the face of it they made some very, very basic errors in the pursuit of their own coup, which of course ended therefore in their own defeat.
Interesting times. Dr. Jonathan Spire, thanks so much for being with us.
Thanks.